Julian Cross adjusted his simple black mask one more time before stepping out of the taxi onto Fifth Avenue. The glittering lights of the Metropolitan Museum cast golden shadows across the stone steps, where elegantly dressed guests climbed toward the charity masquerade ball. For the first time in months, Julian wasn't arriving in his private car with bodyguards and assistants trailing behind him. Tonight, he was just another guest in a rented tuxedo, carrying a wallet with exactly $200. Cash instead of the platinum cards that could buy anything his heart desired. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was attending a fundraiser for arts education while desperately trying to escape the very wealth that made such donations possible. As the founder and CEO of Neotech Solutions, Julian's company had revolutionized digital security for major corporations worldwide. At 32, he was worth more than most small countries, but the golden handcuffs of success had begun to feel heavier each day. Inside the museum's great hall, crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of masked faces. Women in flowing gowns danced with men in perfectly tailored suits, while a string quartet played classical melodies that echoed off the marble columns. Julian accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and moved through the crowd, grateful that his simple mask allowed him to blend in rather than command attention. He was observing the auction display when a flash of silver caught his eye. A woman with dark hair swept into an elegant updo was moving through the crowd with a professional camera, capturing candid moments of the evening. Unlike the other guests, she wore a simple silver dress that seemed to shimmer under the lights, and her mask was adorned with delicate silver feathers. There was something different about her movements. Purposeful, yet graceful. As if she belonged to this world, but remained somehow apart from it. Julian found himself following her progress through the ballroom. He was fascinated by how she seemed to see everything while remaining nearly invisible herself. When she stepped onto the museum's outdoor terrace for what appeared to be a brief break, he seized the opportunity to approach. The terrace overlooked Central Park in the cool autumn. Air provided relief from the warmth of the crowded ballroom. She was standing at the stone railing, looking out over the city lights with her camera resting on the ledge beside her. "Beautiful view," Julian said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and even behind her feathered mask he could see warm brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and creativity. "It is," she agreed, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "Sometimes I think the city looks more honest at night. All the harsh edges softened by darkness and distance." "That's a poet's observation," Julian said, moving to stand. Beside her at the railing, "Are you a photographer by trade? Or is that camera just for tonight?" Elena Rivera smiled beneath her mask. She had been photographing high society events for 3 years now, ever since graduating from art school with more dreams than job prospects. "Both, actually. I'm Elena, and you would be." "Just call me Jules," he said, using the nickname only his closest childhood friends had known. Something about this woman made him want to shed all the titles and expectations that came with his real name. "So you're working tonight, not just enjoying the party?" "Working," Elena confirmed, though she didn't sound bitter about it.
"Someone
has to capture all these magical moments for the people who are too busy living them to remember them clearly later." Julian was struck by her perspective. In his world, every moment was documented by professional photographers, videographers, and social media managers. The idea of someone choosing to observe rather than participate felt refreshingly honest. "What about you?" Elena asked. "What brings you to a charity ball on a Tuesday night, besides the obvious good cause, of course?" Julian paused, considering how to answer without lying. "I needed to remember what it feels like to be around people who are passionate about something other than profit margins and quarterly reports." "Rough day at the office?" Elena's tone was sympathetic rather than mocking. "Rough year, actually," Julian admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Sometimes I wonder if I've built a life that looks successful from the outside but feels empty." From the inside, Elena studied him for a moment, noting the genuine sadness in his voice, despite his obvious privilege. His tuxedo might be rented rather than custom-made, but there was something about his bearing that suggested he was accustomed to carrying significant responsibility. "What would you do instead?" she asked. "If you could start over completely." The question hit Julian like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked him what he wanted, rather than what the company needed or what the shareholders expected? Travel, maybe, he said slowly. See places that aren't connected to business deals or investment opportunities. Learn to cook something more complicated than scrambled eggs. Read books that don't have anything to do with market analysis or corporate strategy. Those don't sound like impossible dreams, Elena said gently. They sound like choices. Before Julian could respond, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and sighed. I'm sorry, but I need to get back inside. The evening's main event is about to begin, and I need to photograph the auction. Of course, Julian said, though he felt a sharp disappointment at the interruption. Maybe we could continue this conversation later. Your work is finished. Elena hesitated, drawn to this mysterious man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, despite his obvious wealth and privilege. There was something genuine about him that she rarely encountered in her professional circles. I'd like that, she said finally. But these events usually run quite late, and I have an early morning tomorrow. Then maybe we could meet for coffee. Sometime this week, Julian suggested, pulling out his phone. I promise I won't bore you with any more existential crises. Elena laughed, a sound that made Julian's chest tighten with an unfamiliar warmth. I don't mind existential crises, she said. They're more interesting than small talk about the weather. They exchanged numbers. Elena felt a flutter of anticipation as she saved his contact information under jewels from the ball. There was something intriguingly mysterious about him, and she found herself looking forward to learning more about the man behind the melancholy observations and expensive but understated clothing. I should really go, Elena said reluctantly, picking up her camera. But Jules, yes. For what it's worth, I think the fact that you're questioning whether your life has meaning probably means you're closer to finding that meaning than most people ever get. With that wisdom delivered, Elena slipped back through the terrace doors into the golden warmth of the ballroom, leaving Julian alone with the city lights and a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in his adult life, he had met someone who seemed to see him rather than his net worth, someone who challenged his thoughts rather than agreeing with everything he said. Julian remained on the terrace for several more minutes, watching through the glass as Elena moved through the crowd with her camera, capturing moments of joy and connection that he had forgotten could exist. When he finally returned to the party, he found himself searching for her silver dress among the crowd. But she seemed to have disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Julian realized he was looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in months. Not because of a business meeting or a potential deal, but because he might hear from a woman named Elena, who saw poetry in city lights and wasn't afraid to ask difficult questions about the nature of happiness and success. The taxi ride back to his penthouse apartment felt different somehow, as if the brief conversation on the terrace had shifted something fundamental in his perspective. For 32 years, Julian had built his identity around achievement and accumulation. But one evening with a mysterious photographer had him wondering if he had been measuring his life with the wrong instruments entirely. 3 days after the masquerade ball, Julian found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, canceling meetings to walk aimlessly through Central Park. He had texted Elena twice since the ball, but her responses had been brief and professional. She was busy with work, she said, but maybe they could meet for coffee soon. The maybe felt like a polite way of putting distance between them. And Julian couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow disappointed her without understanding how Elena, meanwhile, was struggling with her own confusion. The mysterious man from the ball had occupied her thoughts far more than was reasonable for someone she had spoken with for barely 20 minutes. There was something about Jules that felt both familiar and completely foreign, as if he existed in a world she recognized but could never quite access. His expensive clothes and cultured speech suggested wealth. But his loneliness felt genuine in a way that most wealthy men she encountered through her work seemed incapable of expressing. Was reviewing photographs from another society event when her phone rang with a call from her agent, Patricia. Elena, darling, I have something interesting for you. Patricia's voice bubbled with excitement. Neotech Solutions is hosting their annual innovation showcase next week, and they specifically requested a photographer with your aesthetic. Pay is excellent, and it could lead to more corporate work if you're interested. Elena nearly dropped her phone. Neotech Solutions was one of the most successful technology companies in the world. Known for their mysterious founder who rarely appeared in public, she had read about their innovations in digital security. But the corporate world felt light years away from her usual artistic circles. "What kind of event is it?" Elena asked, already mentally calculating how much the payment could help with. Her overdue rent, product launches, networking, the usual corporate affair, Patricia explained. But they want someone who can capture the human element, not just stiff boardroom shots. "I immediately thought of your work from the museum ball last week." Elena agreed to take the assignment, though she felt a familiar anxiety about working. In the sterile world of corporate success, her art focused on authentic human moments, and she worried about finding genuine emotion in a room full of business suits and rehearsed presentations. The Neotech building rose like a glass and steel monument to technological achievement in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. Elena arrived early on the day of the event, carrying her camera equipment through a lobby that felt more like a modern art museum than an office building. Abstract sculptures and digital art installations created an atmosphere that was both impressive and slightly intimidating. She was setting up her equipment in the main conference hall when she heard a familiar laugh from across the room. Turning, she saw a man in an impeccably tailored navy suit speaking with a group of executives. His back was turned to her, but something about his posture and the way he gestured while speaking made her heart skip unexpectedly. When he turned, around Elena's breath caught in her throat was Jules from the masquerade ball, but transformed. Gone was the slightly rumpled tuxedo and melancholy demeanor. This version of him commanded the room with quiet authority, his hair perfectly styled, his bearing confident and decisive. But it was definitely him, those same intelligent eyes, and the way he tilted his head when listening to others speak. Julian was in the middle of explaining a new security protocol to his development team when he spotted a familiar figure across the room. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Elena was standing near the photography setup, wearing a simple black dress and holding a professional camera, looking as beautiful and composed as she had at the museum. But what was she doing at his company's event? Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Julian felt the same electric connection he had experienced on the museum terrace. Elena's expression shifted from surprise to confusion as she took in his obvious position of authority within the company. The other executives were deferring to him, waiting for his input, treating him with the respect reserved for someone at the very top of the corporate hierarchy. "Excuse me for just a moment," Julian said to his team, crossing the room with determined strides. "Elena," he said when he reached her, his voice warmer than the professional tone he had been using with his colleagues. "This is an unexpected surprise, Jules," she replied, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I'm here as the event photographer. I had no idea you worked for Neotech." "I don't work for Neotech," Julian said, and Elena felt a moment of relief before he continued. "I founded it, Julian Cross." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Julian Cross, the billionaire tech mogul whose success story was legendary in business circles. The man who had built a global empire before his 35th birthday, his net worth was estimated in the tens of billions. The same man who had stood on a museum terrace 3 nights ago, telling her about his longing for a simpler life. "Julian Cross," Elena repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. "The Julian Cross." "Yes," Julian said, and he could see the walls going up behind her eyes. "But I'm also Jules, the man you met at the museum." Nothing about our conversation that night was false. Elena stepped back, creating physical distance between them. "Nothing was false, except your entire identity." "Elena, please let me explain." Julian began, but she was already shaking her head. "I need to do my job," she said, lifting her camera like a shield between them. "We can talk later if there's anything left to talk about." The rest of the event passed in a blur of tension and unspoken communication. Elena moved through the crowd with professional efficiency, capturing the moments of innovation and corporate success that Neotech wanted to showcase. But she was hyper-aware of Julian's presence in the room, the way other attendees gravitated toward him, seeking his approval or opinion on various matters. she watched him deliver a keynote speech about the democratization of digital security. His voice confident and engaging as he spoke about making advanced technology accessible to smaller businesses and individual users. The passion in his voice when discussing his company's mission reminded her of the longing she had heard on the museum terrace. But now it felt complicated by the knowledge of who he really was. During a break in the presentations, Julian approached her again while she was changing camera lenses near the refreshment table. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, his voice low enough that others couldn't overhear. Elena glanced around the room, noting how several people were watching their interaction with obvious curiosity. "This isn't the place," she said. "Then name the place," Julian replied. "Any place you want. I owe you an explanation." Elena considered refusing entirely, but the genuine regret in his voice made her hesitate. Despite her anger and confusion, she couldn't deny that their connection at the museum had felt real in a way that most of her interactions with wealthy clients never did. "The coffee shop on 42nd and Lex," she said finally. "Tomorrow at 2. But Jules?" "Yes. Don't bring your corporate entourage or your security detail. If you want to talk to Elena the photographer, come as the man I met on that terrace, not as Julian Cross the billionaire." Julian nodded, understanding the distinction she was making. "Just me," he promised. "No one else." The remainder of the event felt interminable. Elena completed her work with professional competence, but her mind was elsewhere, processing the revelation that the lonely man from the museum was actually one of the most powerful people in the technology industry. When the last photograph was taken and the equipment packed away, she left the Neotech building feeling as if her entire understanding of their encounter had been turned upside down. That night, Elena sat in her small studio apartment, reviewing the photographs from the event on her laptop. In image after image, Julian commanded attention and respect. But in the candid shots she had captured when he thought no one was looking, she could still see traces of the melancholy that had drawn her to him at the museum. The question that kept her awake until dawn was whether the loneliness was real, or if it was just another carefully constructed facade from a man who had clearly mastered the art of presenting different versions of himself to different audiences. Julian arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately. He had traded his usual designer suits for jeans and a simple gray sweater, hoping to bridge the gap between Julian Cross, the CEO, and Jules, the man Elena had connected with at the museum. When she walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock, wearing a vintage leather jacket and carrying a worn canvas bag, felt the same flutter of attraction mixed with nervous anticipation. Elena approached the table with measured steps, her expression carefully neutral. She had spent the morning researching Julian Cross online, reading article after article about his meteoric rise in the tech industry, his estimated net worth, and his reputation as a brilliant but intensely private business leader. The more she learned, the more betrayed she felt by his deception at the museum. "Thank you for coming," Julian said, as she sat down across from him. "I almost didn't," Elena replied honestly. "I'm still not sure why I'm here." Julian signaled the waitress and ordered 2 coffees, remembering that Elena had mentioned preferring dark roast during one of their brief text exchanges. The small gesture wasn't lost on her, though she tried not to let it soften her resolve. "I owe you an explanation," Julian began, leaning forward slightly. "Everything I told you at the museum was true. My feelings, my loneliness, my questions about whether success is worth the cost. The only thing I didn't tell you was my name. Your name and your net worth, and the fact that you own a company worth billions of dollars," Elena said, her voice sharp with hurt. "Significant omissions, they are," Julian acknowledged. "And I understand why you feel deceived. But Elena, I need you to understand something. When I'm with you, I forget about all of that. For the first time in years, someone saw me as just a person, not as a business opportunity or a status symbol." Elena stirred her coffee absently, processing his words. "Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that someone you trusted has been lying to you? Even if it was by omission?" "I wasn't trying to deceive you," Julian said earnestly. "I was trying to protect something real. Every relationship I've had in the past 10 years has been contaminated by my wealth. Women who pretended to love me, but were really in love with my bank account. Friends who only wanted business connections. I wanted to know if what we had could exist without all of that. But it can't exist without all of that, Elena replied. Frustration creeping into her voice, because that wealth is part of who you are. It shapes every decision you make, every experience you have. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Julian was quiet for a long moment, recognizing the truth in her words. You're right, he said finally. I can't separate myself from my success, but I can choose what to do with it. What do you mean? Pulled out his phone and showed Elena a news article that had been published that morning. The headline read, Neotech founder announces major philanthropic initiative. Elena scanned the article quickly, her eyes widening as she read about Julian's plan to donate the majority of his wealth to arts education programs and small business development funds. I made this decision before I knew you would be at yesterday's event, Julian said. Our conversation at the museum made me realize that I've been using my success as a shield instead of a tool for meaningful change. Elena looked up from the phone, searching his face for signs of manipulation or calculated charm. Instead, she saw the same vulnerability that had drawn her to him on the museum terrace. This is a grand gesture, Julian, she said carefully. But it doesn't change the fact that you lied to me. You're right, and I'm sorry, Julian said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. I should have believed that you might be different from everyone else who has tried to use my wealth for their own purposes. Elena felt her anger beginning to crack, replaced by a confusing mixture of hurt and understanding. She could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. But she wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible when trust had been broken so fundamentally. I need time to think, she said, standing up from the table. This is all too much to process right now. Of course, Julian said, rising as well. Great. Take all the time you need. But Elena, please believe me when I say that what happened between us at the museum was the most real thing I've experienced in years. Elena left the coffee shop feeling more confused than when she had arrived. Julian's apology seemed genuine, and his philanthropic announcement suggested that their conversation had affected him as deeply as it had affected her. But the wound of his deception was still fresh, and she wasn't sure if their connection could survive the weight of his hidden identity. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into her work, taking on assignments that kept her busy and distracted. But Julian's presence seemed to follow her everywhere. His philanthropic initiative was featured prominently in the news, with particular attention paid to the arts education programs that would directly benefit struggling artists like herself. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Elena received a call from Patricia that changed everything. Elena, you need to get down to your studio immediately, Patricia said, her voice breathless with excitement. What's wrong? Elena asked, alarmed by her agent's tone. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Just get down there. Elena rushed through the rain to the converted warehouse, where she rented a small studio space. Sharing the building with several other artists who were barely making ends meet, when she arrived, she found the building transformed. Construction. Crews were installing new lighting systems, upgrading electrical connections, and painting walls. A sign by the entrance read, Community Arts Center, sponsored by the Julian Cross Foundation. Elena stood in the rain, staring at the sign, as the implications of what she was seeing sank in. Julian hadn't just made a public gesture with his philanthropy announcement. He'd quietly and personally ensured that her struggling artist community would have the resources they needed to continue their work. Her phone buzzed with a text, message from an unknown number. This isn't about you. And me. These artists deserve support regardless of what happens between us. But I hope you'll let me explain in person. Same coffee shop if you're willing. Elena looked around at the bustle of activity, at her fellow artists who were emerging from their studios with expressions of wonder and gratitude. She thought about Julian's words at the museum about questioning whether his life had meaning. She realized that he had found a way to create meaning that went far beyond personal gain. An hour later, Elena walked into the coffee shop where Julian was waiting at the same corner table. This time, when she sat down across from him, her expression was softer, more open. You didn't have to do this, she said without preamble. Yes, I did, Julian replied. Not for you, but for them. And for me, you helped me understand that real success means lifting others up, not just climbing higher yourself. Elena studied his face, seeing the same genuine emotion she had glimpsed at the museum ball. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we start over," Julian said, extending his hand across the table. "Hi, I'm Julian Cross. I'm a recovering workaholic billionaire who's learning to use his resources for good instead of just for growth. I'm also someone who would very much like to take you to dinner if you'll have me." Elena looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before reaching across the table to take it. "I'm Elena Rivera," she said with a small smile. "I'm a photographer and artist who's still figuring out how to balance idealism with paying rent. I'm also someone who believes in second chances, especially for people who are willing to change." "So dinner?" Julian asked hopefully. "Dinner," Elena agreed. "But somewhere simple. I want to get to know Julian the person, not Julian the philanthropist or Julian the CEO." "I know just the place," Julian said, his smile brightening the entire coffee shop and Elena. "Thank you for helping me remember who I want to be." As they left the coffee shop together, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since their first meeting at the museum. The possibility of genuine love with someone who had finally learned to be authentic about both his flaws and his potential for good.